I've had people ask me over the years, like, oh, do you have a bunch of designs, and then you find somebody and you think like, oh, this one, let me go through my catalog. This is the one for you. Like you're picking out a record to find just the right song for an evening. And that for me is definitely not the case, because the personality of the person alone has such a big impact in what the design ends up being.
Hello and welcome to Architecture, Design, and Photography. Today we are speaking with architect Joanna Shaw, who is a principal at Winkelman Architecture in Portland. Joanna received her BA in Architecture from Cornell University and MA in Architecture and Urban Design from Columbia University. Prior to coming to Maine, Joanna practiced architecture in both Melbourne, Australia, and Los Angeles. Her work has been published in both acclaimed regional and national publications. Joanna is currently on the board of Architalks and a professor of architecture at Colby College. Our interview today is sponsored by Maine Home Design. Don't miss Joanna's AIA Design Theory in the upcoming June issue of Maine Home Design. Thank you for coming to the studio today, Joanna Shaw. You work at Winkelman Architects. I
do.
have photographed some of their work, and it's amazing work every time I see a Winkelman project. They do incredible work. Will's a very creative guy.
Yes.
And as I said earlier, you must be very talented to work there.
Thank you.
Talk to me about how talented you are.
Oh my.
And where your talent comes from, and why do you have talent?
I think that the biggest piece of it is inspiration, and how it comes out or how other people perceive it is in some sense in their eyes.
What inspires you?
But I really love art. And I think of architecture as a form of art, of course, but growing up, any media, clay, markers, paint. There we go. How's that?
Good.
I just really love to make things.
Now, what is art to you?
I think art is, excellent question. It's a way of seeing something that might not initially be obvious. So I think art is a way of seeing light in a different form. Mm-hmm. Art is a way of seeing materials or properties or ideas in a way that might be in some ways conversational. But I think in terms of, visual arts specifically, is the sort of combination of taking a concept or a process and being able to relate it in some way that's new in its sort of existence in the world.
Right.
I really love sculpture and art installations. So, for example, Storm King, which I think is
this is interesting because I've never understood, or I've never been moved very much by installations and sculpture specifically.
Yeah,
this is
interesting.
Good.
This is very interesting.
Because I think I don't quite understand them or get them as easily.
Yeah.
But I do remember seeing an installation that was, and my wife loved it as well. It was in the MoMA down in Boston, the Modern Art Museum.
Oh, the CMCA.
CMCA. Okay. So when we went through there, they had this installation that looked like someone had blown up a campfire. Mm-hmm. And it was just all these pieces of charcoal that were suspended in this cube/grid pattern that just looked like something like a huge log of charcoal had just exploded, and they had frozen it at one moment. And so as you moved around it, the whole thing was just like you were able to freeze frame something and just turn it like kind of like Matrix style, Yeah. It was really interesting. It was confusing when you first looked at it, and that to me was very interesting just on a spatial and visual level, and to have it to be such a light absorptive material as well, but slightly reflective as charcoal, campfire log
it has like a
embers
sheen
can be.
to it.
It's like a sheen, but it's still very porous at the same time.
Yeah.
And that's the only thing I can remember. I mean, I saw the David sculpture and it's like, wow, that's incredible, but I don't have any emotions around it, right? But that blown up campfire thing, that gave me something. I don't know.
Well, I think that's attributed in a way to what I think is so wonderful about installations. I mean, you're talking about that and I'm thinking, wow, I wish I had seen that.
It was really cool.
It sounds really amazing. And so part of that, it's spatial.
Right.
and it's an experience, and it's having an experience that you wouldn't otherwise have, right? Somebody created that experience for you. It's choreographed in a sense.
Yeah. So I was talking to someone just earlier today. The mistake on my part for bumping your time when we were going to talk. I apologize again. I'll do that 5 more times. Not the bumping, but the apology. Well, we were talking about photography and how, like, from my perspective, fine art photography, to me personally, is not really all that interesting unless it's slightly confusing. Like, to me, I want to be kind of presented with something that I, to a degree, have to figure out and learn something in the process of figuring that out, or there's just some degree of confusion that I have to work through and then, understand. And like, I recently photographed, my wife is currently renting a couple horses for just a short amount of time, and you can take them on rides and stuff, and then you get them back. So you don't get any of the real hefty expenses or responsibility. And,
So you can rent horses?
Yeah, you can. Wow. Which doesn't it feel a little dirty? Like you're just kind of like, I'm going to rent some friends for a while, or I'm going to, rent a husband or a wife for a while. It just feels a little weird to me, but you can.
Wow.
And so she did. And I photographed her on the beach, just her and my son kind of, they go there like every Sunday and they just gallop down the beach and stuff. And so I thought I'd go get a picture of it. I got this really cool picture of her in like mid gallop, but it doesn't look like a gallop. She's there, and it's like the horse just jumped directly up, tucked its feet underneath it, and she's in like perfect posture. She's not leaning forward. So it looks like it's confusing. It doesn't look like there's a lot of forward movement, but it's just up. And so just that little bit of confusion, it makes you stop. And it was really, really flat light, and it's just, sand and then a water horizon line. So it's really minimalistic, and then this dead center thing that's slightly confusing in the lower half of frame. And to me, that I look at it and I'm like, wow, I love that. And, it's something weird there, and I think there's something with art to me that gets at some aspect of truth that you experience through emotion, through experience, through some type of processing that makes the best pieces of art valuable, maybe. I don't know. You seem to be more knowledgeable on that part of it.
I don't know about
seem
that.
To just talk too much. So
no, I mean, I think something about what you're saying. Do you think part of it is sort of the unexpected, the difference of looking like at this, like a sculpture of David, and saying like, all right, anatomically, I know what to expect here.
Yeah.
Possibly a little bit larger than life, but then to see something where it's unexpected, you think, how did the horse get in that position? Like, is it a jump straight up?
Right.
Where did it come from?
Right.
Or the exploded installation of campfire, that an unexpected moment, right?
Who would have thought to do that? And it's so cool, like someone had to think like, oh, I'm going to do this, and it's going to take me so long to do that, but it's going to look awesome when it's done. That's a little gift. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. I think that's what's so fun about designing, in a way, is being able to create that unexpected moment in a sense, and having it feel satisfying at the same time, right? I mean, in terms of architecture, it's about comfort or enjoying the beauty of a moment, or how you see a space, or how light fills a space, or how you live someplace. But to have it be a new experience, if it's a house and you live in it every day, of course there are experiences that are part of a rhythm or that are repeated. Right. But I think that having a place or a space or a piece of art that still, intrigues you in a sense day to day can be really enriching.
I wonder, like, when people buy art, do they tend to cycle it out? I don't generally buy art.
Yeah.
I usually kind of concoct my own weirdness because I'm cheap, and then put it on my walls, and I end up putting up stuff that I like. But I think I probably, like with cars, I don't spend like, normal amounts of money on cars. I'm, again, cheap, but I cycle out a lot of cars because I like that there's a new aesthetic that I'm getting in and being transported around. And I've had as many cars as years I've been married. And my wife points that out. And my rebuttal is like, well, I've only had one wife the whole time, sweetie. So But I wonder that idea of the repeated experience, like you're talking about, and then changing that up with my own desire of how I work and everything else. I'm very much drawn to a changing experience. How do you design as an architect do you consider, like, how do I keep this space, how do I design it in a way that maybe changes the experience these people have just even within a day, because that's all you really get. Well, you'd get seasons
Yeah,
and
and
days,
seasonally,
right?
I mean, especially in Maine, seasons
Yeah.
are such a big part in how people use spaces, or how,
Yeah.
do they have family in their household? Does, the family unit expand and contract over time? Everyone wants to be here in the summer, right? And how even that changes, the use of a space of crowding in extended family
Right.
versus, back down to two people.
We've been experiencing that.
Yeah, it's definitely a reality. And one of the great parts of being here. But I think, even to say daily, whether it's a difference between how spaces are used from morning to night, or if it's the difference of tracking how the sun moves around a building and daylight comes into it, to know that you're going to be either part of that pattern or be able to witness that change through time. I think that that's one of the similarities with art in a way. I mean, if I classify art as something maybe more formal, but I think it's that, like, those ephemeral qualities where it's not just, okay, this column fits nicely here, but being able to peel away the skin of the building in a sense and think about it just in terms of that experience. What changes from morning to night? Is it the quality of light that changes? Is it the sounds of the environment that you're in that change? And does that then have an impact on how you interact with your space?
Because just
that sense of variety
for sound for a space is not something that a lot of people would think about, other than designers or people who have not accommodated for it and then experience very loud children. Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely a sound factor.
Yeah. It's for us in our house, I had roughly designed our house and then passed it off to a friend of mine to finish, Caleb, who did a great job. And we invested in a window wall kind of system on the dining room and living room area. And it's interesting, like, just the change in the feel of the space from having leaves to not having leaves.
Yeah.
That just the whole feel of the location because of that, and how you experience it differently, and then how the sun rises and sets differently being in that space with a lot of windows is really interesting. And then even like daytime to nighttime, in buildings I had been in at night that had large expanses of glass, the walls just go black. And that's not something you really think about until you're in that space and are, a person that would notice. Like, if I hadn't noticed, most anyone that comes over to my house probably wouldn't have cared or noticed, except for Caleb and myself. Everyone else just would have. But I've found these LED, basically stadium lights, and put one outside where it wasn't going to shine into the building but would illuminate out from where you would see sitting inside. And all of a sudden, instead of having black walls, you see like this really great green and trees and rocks. And so even at night, you're still able to see out. And it's that changing of the day that I think when you interact with a great designer who can preconceive those issues, that's when you get all that value out of that money spent into design. So
yeah, well, and I think change is inherently something, talking about art collection or cars or whatever it might be. I think that many people are interested in change. It's changing your clothing.
Some are.
And some people aren't. Which is an interesting design problem, right? If you were to say nothing changes ever.
Have
right?
you had clients that are, like, I would see individuals that are conservative. I'm not talking as much politically as much as his personality type.
Yeah.
Individuals that are conservative compared to individuals that are more liberal in their just personality and outlook. Have you ran into those types in designing for people and had to accommodate that in some way?
I think so many unique and different personalities, which is part of what's interesting. Every project isn't solving the same problem for the same personality type.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, the site is different. That's a perimeter
It's like
that
the
you look at
first
and consider.
unavoidable kind of thing.
Yeah, but then the person, their personality, their habits and traits, such a big part of what a design is. And it's interesting. I've had people ask me over the years, like, oh, do you have a bunch of designs, and then you find somebody and you think like, oh, this one, let me go through my catalog.
Right.
This is the one for you. Like
Right.
You're picking out a record to find just the right song for an
Right.
evening. And that for me is definitely not the case, because the personality of the person alone has such a big impact in what the design ends up being. I mean,
right.
And so it would be impossible to
they're
say
kind of
like,
part
this
of
fits
the
you.
band rather than someone you're picking out a album for.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and it's kind of like you kind of have to be the leader of the band that's not the lead singer. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you can't be the full personality and
Right.
overwhelming Mick Jagger frontman or Steven Tyler, but you have to be this different dynamic where it's like I think it's Tom Schultz is the guitarist for the classic rock band Boston, but he wasn't the lead singer. He was the lead guitarist, but he was really kind of the leader of the band, I believe. But he wasn't like the front man that was everything, but he was guiding the whole thing,
I think that's exactly it. Because at the end of the day, I'm not even in the picture. Right? All goes well and I step back and someone else lives their life. And so there's providing direction for that design to happen, and then leaving and letting it unfold in its own story with its own inhabitants.
Right.
And maybe one day even it changes hands and there's new people, or it transforms, which is its own relative change, right? So change always in the picture in some form or another.
If you had to give advice to, let's be honest, 90% of the population who can't afford your services or my services, really, right? We're really selling very expensive flowers is the analogy I've experienced the ability to live in a house that was tailored to my family, and it's incredible. It's beautiful. If you had to boil it down to some extremely valuable points to pass on to someone, okay, when you're laying out your house, if you truly can't afford even to associate with an architect, what advice would you give them? Things to like use as waypoints or something?
Yeah. So I think a lot of people think about a house in terms of sort of scripted rooms, right? Living room, dining room, kitchen. And I think if you think about it in terms of actions, right? Cooking, eating, socializing. And what does that mean? Because socializing for two people who maybe just met versus socializing with old friends and different patterns, it's different for everybody, right? So that format of like, this is a living room and it has a fireplace and 3 couches and 2 chairs and a table for great books might not be the right recipe. And I think people take that for granted. So I guess my advice would be to think about like your own habits. What does it mean? Not the title or name of a room and how many you have to have, but what are your actions? What do you play with your kids? And is that a big part of your daily habit? And therefore, like, do you not need a living room, but a playing room? And do you need a place that's quiet? And do you eat in the place that you cook, or do you eat someplace separately? What is that important? No. Great. Friends are good.
Important friend.
Good. But what does that look like? I think if you kind of take away the titles and just think about like, okay, I love to cook and my husband loves to cook and we make a big mess and we need a lot of space. Well, then you've kind of described what your kitchen might be, right?
Lots of more square footage and money to that is then
or how
really
you prioritize,
think about how you use that space, and or how you prioritize. Like for my wife and I knew we were lucky enough to get some land that we wouldn't have to see other houses, at least. And so we knew we wanted to invest in being able to see out of the home to a generous degree. So that was really important. And she also wanted to be able to, she does not enjoy cooking, but
She and I alike.
and also doesn't want. She can enjoy it if it's a function that other people are doing. She's very extroverted and likes to interact with people. So we have a very open concept between,
Right.
kitchen, dining, and living. And so it feels not like you're just go do that in the other room. It's you're all doing that together. And so that is a much nicer experience for her. So.
Yes, I think that's part of it. I mean, does that make sense to you in terms of
Oh
thinking
yeah,
about
no,
like what the
it's kind of like,
activity is, right? And not what the place is that it happens in.
right.
The place is defined as a result of that
Right,
activity.
kind of like remove the names, like look at a floor plan that you would come up with and remove the names out of it, and then talk about what you do in those spaces currently, and where do you get buildup of stuff that's inconvenient, and how do you accommodate that maybe, and just to see how you live. I think that's a great thing. That's pretty much roughly one of the answers I had in the back of my head that I would go to. So maybe I'm onto something a little bit, but what is the? I ask a lot of people this, but what is the foundation to which you judge things to be what you like or don't like in an aesthetic design atmosphere, arena? When you look at something and you say, wow, that's really nice. What is it that is below your acceptance of that being pleasing to you that helps you determine that?
It's a great question. Simplicity.
See, I gravitate towards that too. There would be some people that would say like vibrant complexity, maybe for certain things as well.
And maybe something can be simple and complex at the same time, right? I mean,
I think so. I gotta shut up. I talk too much, but I had this interesting thing where I shot for a furniture maker who had this guy who made furniture for them in a very minimalist and beautiful, like the emphasis was put on the details of how it went together, and it was all very clean and minimal. And as a hobby on the side, he did these very ornate pieces of furniture that were not about the joinery. I'm sure they would be strong pieces of furniture that, but it was not about how it went together and everything else, but it was about all the carvings on it. It was much more ornate in that way. And it was interesting to me, the difference of why certain things were appreciated and valued. And I wondered how much just different backgrounds would inform why something is valued here and why it's valued there. Like, because if you took that really minimalist thing and put it in a different environment, a lot of people might just be like, this is such a gross, plain thing. Like, if you take something and put it in the Baroque period, it's like, what are you thinking? And then you take it and put it in Danish modern somewhere, and they're like, it's beautiful, Like, what is it that does that? Like, what is it informs simplicity as being beautiful for you?
Well, I think the furniture analogy is great because you talk about the joinery, right? That's something so simple. Sometimes the simplest things can be the hardest to design because that joinery, those details and connections,
can't hide any
right?
of the.
It's so much more apparent, and so I think there's a sort of truth in form that how the joinery is so important to how a chair goes together, right? Whether or not it holds you up and how successful that is. So to celebrate and see that and let the rest of it be so simple, but allow, the performance of the chair to know, okay, this is a chair. It's used for sitting.
Right.
This is how it went together. And to see the work that's gone into it, I think there's something really beautiful about that. Whereas ornamentation, that in its own is its own craft and its own beauty, but separate from the fact that this is a chair, right? Something, it can be ornate and it can have some ornamental quality that could then be the same on, I don't know, a staircase, or it could be carved into some other piece of, I'm assuming the chair is wood.
Hopefully our pipes aren't about to explode, but I think it's just an old building with the heating system coming on.
We'll see. We'll find out. like a creaky old chair,
Right.
right? Perfect timing. But I think, yeah, what I like about simplicity is that ability to sort of see to what, see past a form even, or how it's made, or the craft of something. And that's coming back to that piece of craft. That's where designing something that's simple can actually be really challenging sometimes. And building something simple can be really challenging.
See, I relate it, like if I look at the evolution of religions over time, they go from very ornate to a much more simplistic form. And I don't mean, I mean simplistic as in how complex a minimalist chair can seem simplistic when it's not.
Right.
And I look at, how the design from the culture that would have this very ornate type of religion 300-400 years ago, the architecture, furniture, dress, and everything else that comes out of that as well is just as ornate. And then, these hundreds of years later, the religion has also gone to this much more, simplistic to a large degree thing, as well as their dress, their architecture, their art, their furniture. And I wonder, like, why that correlates,
I think in large part it has to do with narrative. I think, like, if you think about Baroque or Rococo art, right, and architecture, it's really ornate, elaborate designs, cathedrals that are beautiful. And I think a lot of that was even, cherubs carved into columns and painted ceilings. A lot of that was storytelling. Right. So being able to see a narrative about a religion in a space. So it wasn't just about having, okay, everything's printed in a book and you can read it and maybe you couldn't read, but to be able to relate and understand or feel sort of the power and strength of that belief system. And then I think where design ideology changed and we ended up, in a much more modernist, pared down environment, I think in a way it's more about the internal or the theological take on things is different. So it's more about how you think about something or how you perceive it or how you perceive religion. It's maybe there's more of a feeling behind it and less about having to relate to a narrative from that space. Does that make sense to you in a way?
That makes sense. I was just listening to something yesterday or the day before that was saying as well, like your right brain, left brain, right? And I'll mess this up. It's one or the other. One side of your brain sees pieces of wood, individual pieces of wood, and the other side of your brain sees the function of the conglomeration of those pieces as being a chair.
Interesting.
So one side is the very analytical, breaks things down. The other side is the collection of these means this, and that's interesting. I wonder if like the French Revolution and rejection of a lot of religion and, these philosophers like Voltaire and who's the other guy, Nietzsche, and, all of them paring these things down and breaking these things down and getting deeper into the human psyche and Freud and all that.
Yeah.
If our design really was influenced by that kind of thinking and that release of all these things that might be true, might be analogy, might be metaphor, who knows, but at some cultural level, there was a working through of this might not be that what's left. And somehow that translates into what people design as far as like taking away the unneeded and remaining with only that which is needed. And how do you make that beautiful? Like, how do you end up with just the legs that hold up this chair and the seat in the back and still make it beautiful? Right. That's interesting. I have not hitherto or thought of that. I wonder. I'd imagine if I had to put money on it, that's what happened. But people with better education than me probably could say so. So I don't know.
we can all make up our own theories, right?
Yeah, well, apparently you know truth before you can explain it, and a lot of us will retroactively explain why we believe something. We'll generally believe or know something before we can explain it, and I found that to be true when I've gone the other direction, when I've stopped believing something. I can analyze it and say it and explain it first, and then again my feelings follow like months afterwards.
Yeah.
It's like, why is this hitting me? Like, yeah, it's weird. But philosophically, what underpins how you design?
It's a great question. I don't know that I have really a clear path answer to it. Maybe, months from now I'll say, oh, this is why I feel this way. But I think it's all of the things that we've touched on in a way. I mean, I think it's that sense of simplicity, but of knowing that there's sort of a truth in what's being designed or what's being built. It's not, it doesn't have this sort of added decorative layers. It really is, form follows function in a sense. I mean, I think
now,
that's
why not the decorative layers for you? And I am in no way proposing that you add decorative layers. I am anti-decorative layers in all aspects of my life. That's why I don't own any ties. But why for you?
I think there's just a simplicity in the way I feel I like to live my life. I think the decorative layers of owning what I need, not going above and beyond that, or, sort of even, I don't know, I think just a day-to-day kind of simplicity. I think if we all kind of pared back and thought about, what we really need and what's functional, and need can be part of, something that contributes to happiness. That can be a need. It's not purely about like shelter and protection, but to some degree, and that's what architecture is as a bare minimum, right? It's about shelter.
Right, exactly.
And I love that. And I think that as a overall contribution to this world that we live in, to be able to provide people with shelter in a really beautiful way, that contributes to their life and their happiness. And I don't know that it needs to be, in a way ornamental beyond that. I think that it performs that function.
Right.
And that's what makes it so beautiful, is that it does inherently what it needs to do to serve.
I wonder
somebody.
what an individual from 400 years ago that would have had an architecturally designed house, would think about that same level of house that they could see today.
Yeah.
And they might look at it and say, like, why on earth would you put so much money, thought, time into the things that are inside of this house that you will never see? And the response would be that, well, the environment, the blah, 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 the insulation and the mold factor, or, all of these things that, they didn't really maybe understand at that point, where now we, instead of adding all this superfluous, am I saying that right? Things on the exterior, have internalized it within a building to a large degree to protect that which we start to realize is fairly valuable and that we could lose.
Yeah. I mean, some of it's, maybe there's part of, building and health, right? Or building and safety. So, those questions of insulation, it's about, protection in terms of the dwelling or the built environment in any way. But there's also an environmental component to it, right? So how does what your decisions, the decisions one person makes, how do they have that larger impact or effect? When we talk about carbon footprint and things, and what we're in an industry where we're making, sometimes we try to reuse and we try to be delicate and sensitive. But at the end of the day, we're making new things. So that has its own energy and impact. And there's this whole chain of how it all relates. So I think to be, in a way, more delicate, is to essentially build what you need. And I think there's a sense of maybe greater respect of saying, okay, we don't need to put all of that ornamentation in it because this is what achieves, the simplest goals of a place for shelter, right? And so, of course, then the reality and the honesty is like the houses that we design aren't simply a place for shelter check. I mean, there is still more to it, and there's luxury and there's comfort and so I think that's the minimal requirement, and then it goes from there. But there's always that point of, I think, just like checking in with the project or checking in with myself and thinking, okay, is this necessary? Is it above and beyond? How tailored can something really be before it gets out of control?
So how deep do you go into that with clients? Like how much do you push them to a degree fit into that preconceived idea of where you would like to see things go, or push them into trying to figure out what they really want? How much do you, as an office, say at a minimum, maybe we want to meet these requirements as a carbon footprint or a green aspect to what we do?
Yeah.
And how much of that do you factor in, you think?
I think there's a really strong evolution of that, and I feel that we're in the midst of. I think in terms of taking into account what the client wants, that's or trying to find what they want and understanding what their goals are is such a high priority, because at the end of the day, it's their space and it's their project, and to have the utmost respect for that. But I think at the same time, like trying to steer somebody to make well-educated decisions. Maybe that's the way to, not just saying this is what you have to do because, but here are the options and, here are the recommendations. And this is why this is a better decision. And, ideally being able to push that more and more to be able to educate clients to say, okay, this is how you're approaching it. This is how we're approaching it. Let's have a dialogue about what's best here. But it isn't a single-handed, okay, if we don't do it this way, then we're not doing it at all. There's still a lot of back and forth in terms of trying to figure that out. But it would be great.
I'd imagine being at Winkelman that there's people know what they're getting and are there because of that.
Right.
They've seen what you guys do and are like, this is great. We want this.
Hopefully. And we care so much. I think that's the big part of it. I mean, all of us do. We care about the clients, and we care about the work, and we care about the impact that it has. And so, finding the right client, client to architect relationship is so important. It doesn't mean it's the right fit, for everybody to want to work with us, or to feel that the design is right or that the ethos is right. But I think that level of, if we care about the same things and the same goals, it's bound to be a good match and to come to some design that everyone's really proud of.
I had a funny lack of interaction with Will probably a month ago. I was shooting on Peaks Island and I was waiting for the ferry and he was getting off.
Oh, yes.
And so I was like, hey, Will. And I don't think he had headphones in or anything, but he was just so focused. Like he was working out problems in his head and he was watching the ground as he was walking. Like you could have like driven in front of him and I don't think you would have seen it. But I was like, hey, Will. He just like straight. And then I mentioned it to the person I was with and I was like, oh no, he's like that sometimes. He just gets in this zone. And, they had said that they had done that as well. And he's just super focused. And I have friends that are designers who it seems to be kind of a, and I say this about a lot of things that creatives do, that you're translating your subjective experience into a product, and I think there's a lot of processing that goes on outside of the time that you're actually working on a problem that all of your experience in life informs. It's not that you're just adding numbers up and making sure they're in the right column. It's not that you're just fixing a carburetor. It's not that you're just working creatively pulls from every aspect of your being if you're going to be good at it.
Completely. I think if you're going to be engaged with solving a design problem, right, because it's problem solving and that never ends. Right. I think you're thinking about it all the time, or you see something that might feel completely unrelated. And you think like, oh, right. Okay. That bird is sitting on that branch. And yes, I just solved that problem for this other thing.
Yeah. Like triggers something. And
right.
Yeah, with my friend that I talked to a lot, he was like, I was in the shower this morning and I figured out. And I was like, how are you always figuring out stuff in the shower? I don't know. But
the creative process maybe has no place or time.
Geez, if you add on top of that being a business owner, it's like you never get away from any of it. Like I'll wake up at 4 a.m. and if anything comes into my mind, I can't go back to sleep. Like, just like, when's that check coming in, or when, anything. And it's just immediately you're a hamster and the wheel's going 50 miles an hour and you better start running kind of thing.
Do you have a process for like writing things down as they come to you, or is it kind of a like moment of clarity and then a few hours later you're like, oh, what was that really good idea that I had?
It's hard because I try and keep a to-do list, and that takes a lot of it off of me. But I find that over time, if I use it too much, that I just kind of disregard it.
Interesting.
Which is obviously not good. And all them like, you know what, there's no shooting like location jobs this week. I'll just, I can turn all that volume down a little bit. And then I mess up scheduling. I'm so sorry.
I think that's only number 3, by the way. You have 2 more to go.
I need to get 2 more in.
Yeah.
So it's hard because like on one hand, I could never be a people manager. Tim over here manages himself and is like the best thing to ever happen to this business, aside from my parents raising me and my wife supporting me. And he doesn't need any management. He's very self-motivated, intelligent. This is my way of...
Good job.
But if I had to manage more people, it just wouldn't work for me, right? Yeah. And so that leaves everything on, anything that I can't pass off to Tim is on me. And that's why I wake up at 4 a.m. with my head going nonstop. But if I had to deal with the stress of like interpersonal office relations and all that, I couldn't, I hear horror stories about that kind of stuff. And I'm like, nope, nope. So it's, it's just kind of part of the territory, and I'm finding ways to deal with it, and, utilizing to-do lists and apologizing profusely when I mess up. So,
as long as you have all of it down, then.
Yeah. It's hard, but I don't know. I know I made a terrible employee, and my oldest son will also, I think, be a terrible employee, but he'll be very self-motivated and maybe a good business owner of some sort someday. I don't know. So
it's important to know, I think, those things about yourself, right?
Yeah, I don't think I knew it about myself until I was really, employed full-time in a like post-university position, that I was like, I'm not going to excel at this. It's just, no matter what, the restriction and the consistency of it was really hard for me. To know you're getting a steady paycheck was very uninspiring. It just, like, there's too much security, lack of change, and potential for failure. It just wasn't there. And for some people that's great. For me, it's just like, I can sleep until 8 if I do that. So what good is that? I don't know. It's a weird thing. But are you someone who you think is going to be strongly self-motivated to be out on your own someday? Or, I mean, maybe you don't want to answer that being employed. I don't know.
No, well, I think the way that our office is structured, that, Will, Eric, myself, there's...
Seems like a pretty small office, but...
It's small, and I think, we have, in a way, we work so independently on projects, but we have each other to be able to come back to and discuss and work through problems and share ideas and share knowledge. But having that freedom, in a way, there's like your own path of self-motivation, right? And so nested in this kind of larger sense of our, office community. And I think that's really wonderfully unique and great for my personality, because I do like having that charge of being able to do something on my own or think through it, but still have that collaborative nature of coming back and talking through something with somebody else. And in a large part, the clients, they're, part of the project team in that way of sharing ideas and thinking through something or solving a problem or looking at it from different angles.
Sure.
So I have Will and we talk through problems, but the clients as well.
Right. So
I think in a way it feels like I'm kind of.
Do you guys have like charrettes weekly or anything, or?
We talk about doing it.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah. I always enjoyed that process of architecture school, of putting all the projects up and like everyone like critically talking about things.
Yes.
But I find it's an interesting thing to avoid letting that into too much of your life. So
right.
I
if you
find
pinned everything up on the wall and let other people comment, it would be.
No. Well, thank you so much for coming all the way down here. Really appreciate it. It was really fun conversation. Appreciate it. And again, I apologize so much for messing up our scheduling, but you're very gracious and really appreciate it. Thank you so much for coming down.
Thank you. This has been really fun.
Cool.
It's been a good sort of dance through different topics. And
right.
really great.
It always is. Awesome.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.